everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on community solar hosted by Livable Arlington as part of our annual Earth Day speaker series. My name is Jennifer Quick, and I'm so glad that you are joining us on this, I know, beautiful Saturday afternoon. You might want to be outside soaking up some of the solar rays from the sun. And instead you're hopping on here with us for what I guarantee you will be worth it. We're excited to have you. So I'm going to be kind of our MC for today, getting things going, kicking us off, but this is the most that you're going to hear me talk today. I just want to start by going through a few housekeeping items. So first of all, for those of us, which is probably everyone at this point, that are familiar with Zoom, this mode might feel a little wonky to you. That's because we are in webinar mode. So if you're like, wait, why can't I mute? Why don't I have a mute button? Why don't I have a video button? That is just how this mode is set up. So generally with a larger audience, it just makes it easier for there to not be any oops moments with video and audio if we set it in webinar mode. And we do have a large audience today, so we want to make sure that happens. So we are helping you out. So that is why that is the case. As I mentioned, there are lots of people in this call. You're only going to see the video of the speaking individual. So when that person pops on, you'll be able to see them speaking. We do have the chat open, but the chat will link up just to hosts and other speakers today. So if you need like a direct question to someone that is a host or a panelist today, you can utilize that. But otherwise, we'll be using that for sharing out links throughout today's call. And then we're also going to be encouraging you to utilize the Q&A. You'll see that in your Zoom bar at the bottom. So as you have questions, you'll just type those in there for us. And then we're going to reserve time at the end of Stephen's presentation where he'll be able to go through, we'll present some of those questions to him so that you can get even more specific, unique information to you. And then finally, for those of you who are maybe used to using the raise hand feature in Zoom, we are not going to utilize that feature today. It can just be a little bit confusing and distracting for people who are not familiar with it. So don't utilize that feature. If you need to get our attention, go ahead and use the chat or the Q&A, as I mentioned. I do want to also shout out just a few special guests that have joined us here today to be a part of this presentation. Nicole Hawkins, she is in constituent services and the outreach manager for State Representative Chris Turner, as well as Kelly Peterson, his chief of staff. We're also excited to welcome, Kelly Peterson is the chief of staff for another special guest, Brian Beck. He is here from the Denton City Council, so we're excited to have those members join with us. We also have a few former elected officials on the call and some other people that are here to get more information. So we are excited for that today as well. So let's look at our agenda. We're going to start off just introducing today's speaker, Stephen Brown with the Clean Energy Fund of Texas. Then Stephen will do his presentation, which is, I've already peeked at it. It looks really exciting and informative. That will be followed by a Q&A. Following Stephen's presentation and Q&A, we are excited. We're going to present the first recipient of our community fund project, some work that we've done locally here in Arlington. And then we will finally close things out with a bang by presenting our 2022 Environmental Justice Award recipient. And that will be also followed by some comments. So we are going to switch gears now, and I am going to start out by passing the torch over to Ranjana Bhandari, Executive Director of Livable Arlington, and she is going to introduce Stephen Brown for us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Livable Arlington, I'm delighted to welcome you all and our speaker, Stephen Brown. I met Stephen in 2014 when he was touring drill sites in Arlington while he was running for the office of Texas Railroad Commissioner. In the years since then, he has done great work promoting Texas's clean energy resources and on facilitating the transition to clean, renewable energy that the world needs. He's currently the president of Capital Assets Energy, a successful clean energy development consulting firm that has secured close to $5 million in capital for energy efficient renewable energy retrofits throughout Texas. He has also helped to develop over 500 megawatts of utility scale solar, assisted local governments on their green energy procurement strategies, and organized communities around environmental justice. He's also the founder and CEO of the Clean Energy Fund of Texas. The fund is focused on making the emerging green economy affordable and just for all Texans. They believe that an equitable transition to clean energy will help to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis, eliminate energy poverty, create green jobs, and catalyze economic development opportunities in historically under-resourced communities. The landmark climate report released by the IPCC on Monday called for a rapid transformation in the way we use energy to protect a livable planet for our children. Stephen, we are so looking forward to learning how community solar can help do that while promoting equity and environmental justice, not just here in Texas, but also in other parts of the country. Welcome. Over to you, Stephen.
Wow, well, thank you so much. And thank you all for inviting me to participate today and be a part of your Earth Day activities and celebration. I am indeed honored to join you today as your guest speaker. And we're going to spend some time talking about community solar in Texas. And, you know, as we kind of prepared for this discussion, earlier in the week, I asked Ranjana and Kevin to send over some questions that they thought, you know, might be asked that I want to cover in the presentation. And I looked at the question and I was like, wow, those are a lot of questions. So what I tried to do then was restructure the slide deck so that, you know, we cover the basics, the who, what, when, where, and how of community solar. Just as a primer to give everybody a sense of familiarity with this project type, and then allow for offline discussions to be had to really drill down on some market specific solutions later. But today's discussion is going to be more of a baseline on what the status of community solar is around the country. How it looks, how it feels, and then we have some takeaways of what can be done in Texas, and then we'll close out. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen. Yep. Okay, there we go. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. A slideshow from the beginning. There we go. And I'm assuming everyone can see this, right? I'm just going to assume that that's the case here. Unless...
You are good, Stephen. Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. Okay. So as I mentioned before, the agenda for today is we'll discuss a little bit about who I am. And Ranjana actually did a masterful job in providing a lot of the context in her introduction. So I wanted to cover all of that. But we will go over the why, what, where, who, and how of community solar, or community share solar, and then what future opportunities exist, and then we'll kind of have some time for Q&A. So this is me on the campaign trail back in 2014 when I met some of you folks there in Arlington. This is actually in the Eagle Ford Shale, but I kind of think of this as my road to the Damascus moment during the campaign when, overburdened with the, with the thoughts of trying to make a change in our railroad commission and its structure and focus. And knowing that I only have the power to do so much. And it was actually from this race that I decided to leave my career in government relations and public advocacy and focus on this emerging clean energy future that the country was taking on, and that Texas is taking on as well. And what role could I play in advancing and accelerating this transition? And what role can I play to make sure that the transition is equitable for all communities throughout the state of Texas? And so out of that, I've created two firms. The first is Capital Assets, And I'm not going to speak too much about this because a lot of this was said in the intro. But essentially, what Capital Assets does is that we primarily are looking to finance renewable energy, energy efficient, water conservation, water conserving projects on all types of buildings, commercial, residential, multifamily, nonprofits. In addition to that, we also originated a 500 megawatt utility scale solar facility in Fort Bend County, the Fort Bend Solar and Cutlass projects. They used over 3,000 acres of land, well over 3,000 acres of land. The good news is that most of that land was not going to be used for commercial usage, and so we were able to work with the landowner to carve out the parts of their land, of their property, that would be a good fit for these projects, and then allow for him to be able to use the other parts of his property to, for any commercial usage. There is also an advocacy component to what we do as well. We still are trying to advance environmental justice policies and sustainable policies at the local and state levels. Last summer, I founded a nonprofit green investment firm called the Clean Energy Fund of Texas. And we are looking to fill the void in the marketplace that really focuses and really, functions from a lens of equity and how we can help to get resources to and in low to moderate income communities. Because I don't have any doubt that, how we are transitioning, into renewables, into energy efficiency is happening. The problem is that it's not happening at equal levels with communities across the state and across the country. And so Clean Energy Fund of Texas is used to really focus on that market segment of folks who would otherwise be left behind, and provide for affordable financing for projects in that space. Our mission is in the green space, and I think Ranjana, kind of talked about that already. So I'm not going to talk too much more about the mission there. But I will say that the lens that we are looking at this problem through is one of addressing the energy burden in the state. There are about 4 million households whose energy costs, are about 6 to 16% of their take-home income, and so that is a disproportionate share of energy, what's called energy burden. That we are hopeful that if we can go in and actually be able to deploy renewables, energy efficiency through affordable financing, that we'll be able to chip away at that burden. And we do know that financial barriers are perhaps the largest barriers to eradicating energy poverty in the state. And so that's one of the problems that we're focused on. As well as, we have the benefit of being a part of a number of different coalitions and teams and stakeholder groups, and really, some key learnings that we are a member of at this point, specifically as it relates to community solar, which is what what we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. One of the things that we're doing is working with Harris County on their clean energy strategy, and part of that strategy is an effort to develop and implement these community solarized initiatives. So creating community solar throughout the county in areas that deal with resiliency problems, energy burdens, a lack of access to solar and renewables. And so that's interesting in and of itself at the county level. We're also working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratories Solar Energy Innovation Network. And again, we're helping them to develop solar financing mechanisms and frameworks around solar plus storage in underserved communities, as well as other best practices to begin to really scale community solar throughout the country. And then lastly, working with the National Community Solar Partnership on its developing a framework to facilitate financing for community solar as well. And so as we're having this conversation today, on this Earth Day 2022, I would venture to say that as a result of these, kind of laboratory experiments that we're a part of at the local and federal levels as it relates to community solar, a similar talk a year from now might be somewhat different, but infused with additional learnings that we've been able to ascertain through our membership with these different organizations as well as projects. And so the National Community Solar Partnership is out of the Department of Energy, and you can see on the left, what their pathway to success is. And of course, we're here in this technical expertise and capacity building stage right now, and we'll be working towards moving down that pathway. So let's start with the why of community solar. It's pretty simple that when you talk about the need for community solar, what we're saying is that there are homes, there are people or households who simply just don't have the adequate space to put rooftop solar on their roofs. Either they don't have roofs, or whatever space they have isn't adequate to substantially make an impact on their energy consumption. And so community solar is an alternative way through which these families will be able to access solar at some off-site facility, but be able to tie that solar to their meter and allow for them to take advantage of the power that's generated on those systems. And so by way of numbers, really about half of Americans don't have rooftops to be able to support solar. And if you drill down a little bit more, you'll see that solar itself only represents about less than 10% of electric generation in the country. Community solar is about 5% of that solar number. And then LI, which is low income community solar, represents even less of a fraction of the solar assets, of the community solar assets that are out right now. And so, we are trying to crack and really tease out exactly how we can make community solar more accessible and affordable for everyone in Texas. We want to be able to identify, some wraparound values that may come with community solar as it relates to resiliency and workforce development. With resiliency, we all remember very vividly a year ago with Winter Storm Uri and the power demands and issues that knocked off a lot of the power generation in the state. But having access to community solar would help to harden our grid and provide for a solution for when power goes down, at least during the daytime, but being able to tap into a power source close by to your home to add that additional layer of resiliency. We're also looking at how we regionalize solar generation and reduce land use impacts, right? And so ideally, you would look at community solar as projects that range around less than about 10 megawatts of solar generation. And so what we are seeing now is, obviously, Texas is a great state to do big utility scale projects similar to the one that we did here in Fort Wayne County. But most of the projects are out in West Texas or in places where the land is cheap and bountiful, and the sun is plentiful. And so what we are suggesting is that, crudely almost, but for every solar panel that is needed to develop a utility scale project somewhere in West Texas, that same solar panel can be deployed regionally and provide for a more regional solution closer to offtake, which would reduce transmission costs and allow for families to tap into that resource more directly. And so that is another way that community solar can serve in this ecosystem. And then here, as you know, in terms of unlocking solar savings for all, studies have shown from the Department of Energy that some 5 million households, if we could get 5 million households signed up for community solar by 2025, we would have we'd be able to achieve a $1 billion in cumulative savings. And even further, community solar allows for a more equitable portion of these benefits to extend to low and moderate income families, similar to what I mentioned before. So what is it exactly? I could read the definitions, but I think this picture probably tells a story just as well. There are several ways that community solar is defined, right? I define it personally as projects that are smaller than about 10 megawatts or so, maybe anything less than 100, right? I mean, 100 megawatts is utility scale solar, and above. Anything less than 100 technically is not utility scale, so it could be termed community. So anywhere that's in that space, say between 0 to 100, could technically be defined as community solar, so long as the installation itself benefits multiple off-takers or owners, referred to as subscribers, and these subscribers enter into contractual relationships with the owner or operator for the installation to receive credit for a predefined share of the installation's output. There's one definition. Another one is simply, what DOE defines as community solar as any solar project or purchasing program within a geographic area in which the benefits of a solar project flow to multiple customers, such as individuals, businesses, nonprofits, or other groups. So essentially what we're saying is that if you look at my friend here, he basically is buying a share of, whatever limit or whatever magnitude that he wants of this solar, community solar site. They're called solar gardens in some cases, but whatever you call it, he is purchasing a subscription into this asset at a fixed rate, which would be a rate that is less than the retail value power. And then whatever is generated from that offering, he would then take advantage of at that reduced rate, ideally, and if there's any excess power from the panels that from this year panels that generated power over the month, if there's some excess, it goes back into the grid, and then we'll talk about what policies can be put in place to recover a credit for whatever excess generation is created through a model like this. But essentially, most models look similar to this, right? The participant might be a larger business or a faith-based, nonprofit. There may be an anchor tenant who might own 40% of the asset, and then the other 60% is shared with the community. But we'll talk a little bit about the different types of community solar projects, but essentially the idea is that you are purchasing access to a solar facility at a rate per kilowatt hour that is less than or competitive with the retail rate, and then whatever power you use in your behind your meter. Whatever you don't use goes back to so what are some of the challenges that are facing community solar? First, obviously, having supportive legislation to incentivize the development and usage of community solar is a key challenge. Permitting and connection on the technical side is going to be a challenge, and of course, financing is going to be a challenge as well. We'll talk about some of these later, but essentially, these are the big items that we'll need to try to overcome in Texas in order to begin to scale community solar in a much more broad way in the state. So where is it? So here you'll see kind of on a state-by-state basis, there are about 39 states that have some type of community solar projects in them. Of those 39 states, 20 of those states actually have laws in place to really incentivize community solar. Those other states are more kind of voluntary markets for community solar, and Texas being one of them is one of a voluntary nature. But the growth of community solar has really taken off since 2010. You'll see that the growth rate's been about 121%, and a gigawatt of community solar came online just in 2020 alone. And then if you look at community solar as it relates to addressing low to moderate income families and communities, that's what LMI stands for. If you look at the projects here, these are mainly states that have some type of incentive around or some types of policies around making sure that everyone has access, whether it's additional incentives for low to moderate income communities, whether it's there's a certain carve out that a certain percentage of the subscriptions have to be folks who live within that social economics in that state. This just tells us, as Texans and as advocates, hopefully of this type of solution, that there are policies that we could tap into to make sure that we can scale, as I mentioned, but scale equitably throughout the state. Okay, and community solar is one tool in a toolkit of solutions to continue the path towards transition to a carbon neutral economy. And even in Texas, there have been a number of community solar projects in Texas. This is a list of the ones to date, and you'll see utility type. They kind of span from municipal owned utilities to co-ops to investor owned utilities. So this just kind of shows that it can be done in different markets, even throughout the state, because we are a state that is home to a variety of different markets. But yet and still, this is such a small sample of what the true opportunities are in Texas to be able to do this stuff and expand it more broadly. You can see here kind of the largest project is about 13 megawatts. So, in my thinking in terms of the size of what a shared community solar project would look like, here it kind of goes up to what we've seen so far in Texas, kind of goes up to 13 megawatts. So who's the who? Let's dive into that. So I broke this down by kind of the micro and the macro who's, because there are going to be people who are going to be key stakeholders that are just a core feature in project development of a project. Those four key elements, you'll have your investor utilities, your developer, and your subscribers. So obviously, if you look at kind of the picture here, you have the owner or whoever is financing the project. You have the facility itself. You have the property owner whose land is it going to be on. You have a developer, energy company, or utility, or retail electric provider. It's kind of that is kind of left to be defined based on where you are, which market you're in. You'll have an operator, someone responsible for actually operating and maintaining the site. And then below here, you're going to have your families who will be subscribed into the asset. But if we look on a more of a macro level, let's look kind of more broadly at who some of the key stakeholders here are. Obviously, you have the government. There's a core role for our state legislature and opportunity for our state legislature to really get behind efforts to expand community solar in the state. And that kind of relates to the policy side of things with regulators and legislatures and our agencies. By the way, one agency that's under sunset review next session, PUC, also has some oversight in terms of some interaction as it relates to the complexity of some of the regulatory features that we might want to try to get around or work through. And so I think this next session might prove pivotal in working with the PUC and other associated agencies of the state government to be able to help us identify opportunities to really scale community solar. Obviously, you have your different utilities, you have your nonprofits, and I'm going to talk about them next, actually on the next slide, but you're going to have any number of community-based organizations that play a core role in this as well. And then obviously, you're going to have your developers, financiers, and consultants, which we mentioned at the micro level as well. So let's talk a little bit about the different utility types and what some of the pros and cons there are. So for most utilities, whether they're munis or co-ops, they're going to have a responsibility of providing reliable, safe, and cost-competitive electricity. But what they're not going to be good at is customer acquisition in terms of getting subscribers to sign into the solar asset. They're not going to have the staff expertise or even the ability to manage subscribers in most cases. For your retail electric providers, their core competency actually is customer acquisition and service delivery, but they're going to typically be risk averse. Their margins are going to be pretty slim, and you're going to have limited organizational capacity and experience working with them. Developers are, as you can see, with the 15 projects now in Texas already, that was really just driven through developer engagement. They're eager to roll their sleeves up and try to figure out solutions for communities around community solar. But it's going to be challenging to find an offtake and to secure financing for those projects. Community-based organizations, kind of putting the community in community solar, they can serve a core feature, as I mentioned before, in this ecosystem, in that they can be the ones to really foster and develop and cultivate involvement and engagement from underserved communities and communities that might benefit from the asset. They can help negotiating support for the projects as it relates to the subscriber, the cost of subscriber acquisition, scoping, and management. They can drive positive business model innovations. And I think, again, to my point at the beginning of this talk, what I know today about this, what I'll know a year from now, quite frankly, even 6 months from now, 3 months from now, will represent kind of the innovation that is taking shape in this marketplace, because it's so new and emerging. I think there are best practices that are being identified every single day. There are new frameworks that are being developed and applied. And so I think there's opportunity for innovations and efficiencies to be achieved here. In some community-based organizations like the one I created, could be a leader in driving those innovations throughout this marketplace. Help members view renewable energy development positively. And so there's an educational component that community-based organizations can play, like Livable Arlington. I think all these 5 bullets will apply to you all's organization as well, in what role you can play in your region around community solar. And then, of course, just creating a positive feedback loop and greater support for the energy transition over the long run, which is effectively what you all are doing now. And I know I, for one, appreciate the work that Livable Arlington has done to date. So let's talk about the how. I think how is really the last one. It's kind of the biggie. I think it's probably the climax, the finale here of this talk. So to make things simple, I wanted to kind of map out for you an illustration of, the different stages from pre-development to development to operations of a project life cycle. And you can see here, kind of where each activity is and takes shape. Obviously, market research is very important during pre-development stages and scoping and identifying financing for the projects. And then as we're looking to develop projects, I mentioned before on the policy side, going to Austin, going to city council, going to your county governments, and trying to identify opportunities where they can be helpful in accelerating the development of these types of assets. Obviously, education is important, and regulatory issues and technical issues where you really start to hone in at the development stage, get your financing secured, and then you go into the managing operations and managing subscribers phase of the project. So some of the due diligence that that you as a community might want to look at, and this is by no means a complete list. This is just to kind of give you a sense of how to think through, think about, putting a project together. What documents, what materials would be needed, particularly from a financer's point of view, looking at a project. We'll want to know what the construction schedule is. We'll want to know, who your EPC is, who will actually be doing the construction, what their qualifications, where the project is. Obviously, we'll want some engineering done at some level. Obviously, financials. We want to know, what the financials look like for whoever is owning the project. If there's a tax equity partner associated, we'll want to know about them. Identify what credit risk is this, what the operating budgets will be, what your debt service ratio. If on the operations side, we'll want to know who are you working with on actually managing and operating the asset. With your off-taker or your subscribers, we'll want to see their bills so we can get a sense of just how much capacity is actually going to be accounted for at that facility. Again, if it's more of a an anchor off-taker like a county government or city council who may off-take 40% of the asset, allowing the community the other 60% to subscribe into, we'll want to see the power purchase agreement with the county or the school district or what have you. And then of course, the off-takers financials to make sure that they can afford to pay through that off-taker, through that power purchase agreement. And then of course, permitting, utility stuff, all the technical stuff, we'll want to see as well. Just to kind of give you a sense of, just general speaking, where you should be looking in terms of collecting information and documentation to submit to financiers and other key stakeholders that will be vital to seeing the project come to fruition. And then let's look a little bit more into kind of your model and what those key inputs might be. Obviously, what is the size of the project that you're looking at doing? How many subscribers are you going to allow to participate in the project, right? And so, how much per subscriber will you be offering to the community? What is the system life of the project? Generally speaking, the system life is going to be between 20 and 30 years or so. And so that's always good to know. What are some of the installed costs? What's the lease agreement that you have for the land itself? Again, operations and management, very important, and oftentimes isn't thought of at this stage. Really at this stage, folks will think about the construction part of the project and not the actual management of the project. And so there are times where the management and the construction aren't in sync, but you don't know that until later in the project development. And so, making sure that your O&M resources are in place and, as you're kind of going through the pre-development stage of things, is good. Let me get through this quickly because I know we are running over a bit. Anchor subscriber, tax benefits, customer acquisition rate. How much money will it take for you to get people signed up to be participants in the community solar project. So lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the public policies. And essentially, we can go through a lot of this, but essentially there are three key aspects that you will find in most legislation related to community solar. One, there's going to be a virtual net metering component to it of some sense. There's going to be some component that's going to streamline connection and allow for the project to be a part of the overall grid for the wholesale market. And there are going to be some incentives, right? For those who don't know, virtual net metering or net metering itself only means that if I have, say, solar panels on my roof, and during the day everything's off, I'm at work, my kids are at school, we're not using much power, that excess power that goes back into the grid is calculated as a credit on my utility bill the next month, right? And so the same thing with with community solar, kind of what I was referencing at the very beginning, where we had the picture of the young man and the solar and the utility, was that essentially what happens is that any excess power that is generated from my share of panels at that site, I get credit for that. That goes back to the grid. I get credit for that, right? And so that is virtual net metering. And obviously, net metering and virtual net metering add additional layer of value that's created to the off-taker, right? And so, we have to have in this state some type of a baseline net metering policy in place anyway right now. I think that alone will help to contribute to an exponential rise in just rooftop solar adoption in the state. But for community solar particularly, there needs to be some virtual net metering offering that the state adopts through the legislature to be able to capture any excessive credit to that's generated from power that you've already purchased through a community solar system. And you'll see, you'll see Colorado and is one of the biggies and one of the first to really get into community solar. Minnesota, I think, is probably one of the most successful states to do it. And we can dig into a lot of this stuff later, but you can see essentially that the result speaks for themselves. You'll see savings that folks who are enrolled in community solar in Minnesota have seen a savings of 5 to 15% on their bills. Not to mention, obviously the benefit of not contributing to a carbon power source, and knowing that you're doing your part to not increase greenhouse gases in this world, as well as the cost avoidance of building new power plants and new transmission lines and all the things that utilities would have done had this asset not been developed. And so lastly, I think this is the last slide, but lastly, what it's going to take moving forward to really move down the road, that path to adoption of community solar in more places throughout the state. Obviously the development and building a statewide coalition who's committed to this, who can go to Austin this next session and really help to draft a community solar bill and work with folks throughout the legislature. I mean, look, this is whether you are green or not, community solar isn't just for one party over the other. Community solar could be a benefit to everybody. You can see even in the chart that I showed before, there are a number of co-ops who already have community solar projects in their jurisdictions. And so this is something that should be nonpartisan, should be geographically diverse in terms of the appeal of it. It should be, quite frankly, something that we as customers should be asking for, that we have these options in the marketplace that we can test and benefit from as well. And so obviously some market specific activation, whether it's in your region, in the Arlington region, or in Houston, Dallas, wherever the case may be, we need those learnings. We can continue to improve upon what we know now and grow that. And then lastly, technical assistance and resource building. That's really what our focus is at the Clean Energy Fund of Texas, is vertically aligning technical assistance with resources, which should not be a novel thing, but it is. But being a financier who can come to the table and actually provide the technical assistance as well to help guide communities down this path and help to get projects on the ground, that is also part of the path forward. That's it, and that's me. And so I guess I will open, or I'll let you guys open the floor for any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So kind of going to synthesize some of the questions here, but folks are definitely curious about what have you seen happening here in North Texas? And do you have any existing kind of projects, connections, things such as that in North Texas? And then taking off from that, if no such projects exist, how would your org play a role in advocacy efforts to get something like that going in this region?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now we're working in Houston, Port Arthur, and Austin on some projects. Nothing in North Texas yet. Would love to sit down and visit with any community stakeholders who are interested, who think that there might be some opportunities in North Texas. I think obviously we want to loop in some of those macro level stakeholders as well. Is important to as a part of the puzzle as well. But I have nothing working on right now in your region, but would love to see what opportunities might present themselves. Thank
you. Another question: can you cancel the subscription to the community solar at any time?
It's project specific. It's similar to whatever contract you have with, if you're in a deregulated market, whatever contract you have with TXU or Green Mountain or whomever, right? So you usually have contracts for a specified term, and then at the end of the term you can either decide to renew it or find someone else. Something similar would be the case here. You would have your share of this project over a specific term, and you can renew it. And if you decide not to renew it, then that opens up space for someone else to buy into the project at that level. And so it'll be kind of term specific.
Great, that is super interesting and helpful. So another question for you. So kind of thinking about, sorry, I just lost I saw a different question. I was on the other one. So what about solar projects in terms of land usage? So thinking about other ways community solar projects could get themselves launched off that wouldn't necessarily require covering up more of the earth. So things like warehouse rooftops, parking garages. Have you seen any projects on those types of in areas like that?
Yeah, so kind of as we talk about the definition of community solar, another layer of that is whether the project is in front of the meter or behind the meter. And typically the ones that are ground mounted are in front of the meter, right? And so it's producing power, and that power is going to your specific meter, your specific house or residence. Or it could be a case where it could be, an aggregation of rooftops that are part of this, this asset, this solar, facility, and that could be more of a behind the meter type of community solar project. So the answer is yes. There's different ways to do it. Obviously, the idea of community solar as opposed to utility scale solar is one to reduce land use impacts because you're not using as much land as you would with a utility project somewhere out in West Texas or wherever. But, I also think that if you go online and you Google or search for, community solar projects, you might find a variety of different types of projects. I've seen like community solar trees, which are really cool. That I'm trying to figure out, how do you do that? How do you create, a tree and the panels kind of represent the leaves on the tree. And, places, especially places where you have a higher density of urban heat, to be able to offer that shading to people in those environments, it could serve dual purposes. So not only does it look cool and neat and interesting, at some park, whatever, but it could also provide for shading in our hot summer months. So yes, the question is, it doesn't have to be a series of arrays on some lantern. We can be as creative as feasible and how we vision, what that looks like for us.
Awesome. I love that tree visual of a tree that has solar panels as leaves. That's
I had it in the slide, but I was already at 30 slides, so I took that slide out. So
we're all going to Google it on our phones now.
Yeah,
we'll find it that
Google
way.
Solar tree, and it's really cool.
Awesome. Okay, another one. You kind of referred to, the utility scale solar. So what are some things that you see as advantages and disadvantages, kind of comparing the two projects? So community solar, which is obviously kind of a different beast, versus the utility scale solar.
Yeah, so in addition to the land requirements, interconnection, making sure for utility scale solar projects, you have to make sure that the transmission lines are equipped and adequate to transmit the power from wherever the power is being generated to wherever the off-taker is. And then you're going to have a reduction you're going to have a transmission costs related to, a site that's, 1,000 miles away to where the power is actually going to go. And so you're going to have those transmission costs are going to be reduced substantially if the power is down the street from where, for instance, the off-taker is. So the transmission cost is key. The footprint is a difference, and then obviously the actual project amount, the financing amount, is going to be significantly less for a community solar project as opposed to the utility scale project. But to go back to the land use piece again, another feature that is being explored in Houston and other parts of the country is to take landfills, abandoned landfills that there's really nothing else you can do with them at this point, and building the project on top of those landfills. A way to maximize utility of land that otherwise would not be used for anything. Whereas you're not impacting land that has the different value sets associated with it. So I think that with utility scale projects, that typically wouldn't be the case, right? There's not many landfills large enough to support a utility scale project, but you could probably do a community scale. We're actually doing one in Sunnyside, not me personally, but the city of Houston is involved in a landfill redevelopment project for community solar, which is going to be cool.
Awesome. Super interesting. Another question, and I know we're gonna probably have time for maybe 2 more questions, Stephen, and then what we'll do is we'll go on to the next 2 parts of the agenda. And then if there's time after those next 2 portions, if there are any other burning questions that I know folks have, we can hop back to those.
Hey, Jennifer, I lost you.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
We can hear you. It might be Stephen's end.
Stephen, could you hear Kevin?
Yeah, I heard Kevin. It's me. It must be me. Sorry about that.
All right. Hey,
Yeah,
Kevin, maybe.
I hear you now.
Oh, okay, you can hear me. Okay, great. Okay. Question about, so what I was saying, Stephen, is we'll do one or two more questions, move on to the next part of the agenda, then we can come back if people have more burning questions. Have you seen any kind of like minimum size piece of land requirements to get one of these started? Is there like a baseline that people need to be thinking of?
No, not at all. You know, as you can see from the list of projects in Texas, you know, some are actually very small. And so because we don't have any community solar laws on the books here, you know, we technically don't have a definition for Texas of what that looks like. And so that will be something that will be defined legislatively. But as you can see under the size column, you know, projects can be as small as, you know, less than an acre in some cases, or a quarter of an acre in some cases, to as big as, you know, 10 to 13 acres.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Had another question. So here in Arlington, and I'm sure if you're familiar with the work of Livable Arlington, we're familiar with there are many gas well sites, and a few questions in the chat and Q&A about this. So
yeah.
One was, as gas well sites are permanently capped in Arlington, are there opportunities to engage in solar project conversations with operators? So have you seen something like that happen before?
I think there's definitely opportunities there, for sure. You know, again, I think it's going to be the issue that we're faced against is that all these questions are great questions, and at some point our legislature is going to have to, you know, address these questions and find solutions and answers for all these questions. And you know, what do we do with all these plugged wells, and you know, hopefully they get plugged. But you know, these wells are no longer in operation. You know, and what can be done there? And quite frankly, there may be some cases where commercial community solar won't be the solution. You know, it might be geothermal or something else that could be a better solution for those, you know, for those sites, right? And so again, we need a legislature that's actually thinking about this stuff and trying to figure out, you know, what use can we get out of, you know, where we were as a state, and then as we become something different, you know, does that look like, you know, some carbon storage facilities, or does it look like, you know, renewable diesel or renewable natural gas or geothermal, you know, and what do we need to do as a state to give these markets a shot of being successful, right? And so I mentioned early on when I first started talking was that, you know, community solar is but one tool in our toolkit. So let's be sure to keep that in mind. But there are other resources out there, other new technologies, other new innovations that exist that we want to put on the table as well, and create a real ecosystem whereby renewable resources can thrive in the state.
Yeah, super interesting. You definitely have an informed audience today, because lots of those questions that I'm looking at are hinting at, you know, really responsible use of what form of renewable energy is selected, how it's selected, all the implications of that. So this audience is like very clearly well prepped on those types of considerations. Yeah. I'm going to throw out just one more question, and then we will move on. And then, like I said, we can hop back into some questions if folks are still wanting to learn more about that. And I'm just scrolling. There was one I was trying to save, and I just got to find it real fast. Oh, so one was, it was actually from a current Denton City Council member, Councilman Beck. He had talked about like what role, and in Denton, they do have 100% renewable, utility scale renewable. So he's wondering, what is the role of community solar in such a utility grade system like that?
Yeah, and Denton is a municipally owned utility, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So if power that's being generated is already been generated by some renewable resource, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, where else to go with that. And again, maybe not community solar, maybe EVs, charging stations. You might want to look at the transportation part of the puzzle and how we decarbonize transportation, identify solutions for more chargers to be deployed and accessible. Because unlike where I live, if I have a charger in my home, so the power's still coming from a coal plant, and right outside of my neighborhood, right? And so in those areas, in those markets where you have renewables that are actually powering buildings and homes and that sort of thing, what can be done now to get that power into battery operated vehicles and other things. So I would look at the other pieces of the decarbonization puzzle for one, but I imagine there might be some opportunities to layer some community solar resources in places like that as well. I don't know for sure. I want to look more into that.
Well, maybe Stephen, one addition to that question is how can community solar not only help us meet renewable energy goals and reduce emissions, but make us more resilient as climate change leads to inclement weather and other impacts? That might be also something to address in that question. Microgrids.
Yeah, and something that we haven't mentioned is the need of more storage, right, and more energy storage resources throughout the state. Right. And so, again, pairing community solar with storage could be hugely valuable and impactful in a state like ours, where we have 100-year floods and storms, every 3 or 4 years. And now, winter vortex that are coming around more often than not. Right. And so battery storage or even, quite frankly, there is a thing such as community batteries, right? And maybe community solar isn't needed in markets, but maybe community batteries are, right? To really address that resiliency point that you were making, Kevin.
All right, I know I keep stretching this, y'all, but these questions are good. So this is going to be kind of the last one here, and then we'll move on. So this is focusing on some work that's happening in the city of Dallas. So they're working on a community solar project at an old landfill and looking at how to make it more environmentally and wildlife sensitive by using available practices and tools. And I'm going to share a link that was shared with this so folks can see that in the chat. But are you discussing how to maximize environmental benefits, including other land uses such as agrivoltaics?
Yeah, that's definitely has to be part of the whatever project development that you're looking to do with community solar. I think that's definitely something that should be top of mind as well. And really, as we talk about the stakeholders that come to the table to be a part of the project development and planning process. We talk about community-based organizations and which ones, we making sure that we have a tent that's big enough to bring in more voices, more stakeholders who can help to make sure that the projects that are being done with the lens, of mitigating a number of different challenges along the way. And so that's part of that stakeholder team that you want to put together, and that kind of stays top of mind to make sure that those types of impacts are looked after as well.
Awesome, thank you. Really, really thoughtful questions. I know we could all probably sit around and talk about this for a long time, as with many of the other kind of climate solutions on the table. And Stephen, thank you for providing us like a broader depth and localizing it for us a little bit here.